Hi, I'm Dr. Emily Block, and today we're going to talk about 3 different theories of leadership. Walking past the book display in an airport, I'm always amazed at how many new books there are that are always trying to sell me the newest trick of how to be the next great leader. Are there really that many pathways to greatness? Which one is the best? Do these people even know what they're talking about? Turns out there's an easier way to understand theories of leadership, and it doesn't involve reading all those books, just knowing how to classify them. They actually fall into 3 general categories: trait theories, behavioral theories, and contingency theories. And once you know what category a theory falls into, it makes it much easier to understand how to assess and how to apply it. The first category of these theories are trait theories of leadership. These theories argue that there are certain basic personal characteristics that differentiate leaders from non-leaders. They assume that leaders have specific innate qualities that make them stand out, and that the job of the organization is to find people with those specific characteristics. Think about the implications of this theory for how organizations engage in recruitment and selection. It means that organizations will invest an immense amount of resources finding and developing the right tools, tests, and indicators to identify the characteristics that they're looking for. This is why so many firms will give you questionnaires as part of their hiring process. They're trying to figure out if you have the right stuff. So what are the traits associated with leadership? Well, that's where it gets a bit messy. Research on trait theories have come up with a long list of characteristics that predict effective leadership. These include, but are not limited to, extroversion, agreeableness, openness, neuroticism, honesty, charisma, intelligence, creativity, achievement, need for power, communication skills, interpersonal skills, general problem solving, decision making, technical knowledge, management skills, ambition, and height. Height? Really? Maybe we perceive some of these traits as being related to leadership because we're so socially and historically conditioned to think of leaders as men. That is, these traits and our assessment of leader effectiveness are perceptual. It also suggests that many of the traits that predict leadership ability is relatively static and that you can't really develop into a good leader, which would absolutely undermine the plot of many good movies about misfits learning how to lead a team to victory. Some of these traits might not be traits at all, but skills that can be learned, which negates the assumptions of the theory. Also, all these traits can't be equally important or equally important in every situation. Unsurprisingly, the empirical scientific evidence around trait theory shows that identifying the traits of great leaders is not the best way to predict an organization's performance. Enter behavioral theories. Behavioral theories of leadership attempt to correct some of the weaknesses of trait theories. They posit that effective leaders consistently behave in different ways than ineffective leaders. The assumption of these theories is that there's one right way to lead and that all leaders should behave in a particular manner. This means that leaders can be trained and that organizations can take generally smart and good people, who may or may not be very tall, and develop them into great leaders. The catch? We just have to figure out what those behaviors are. That's where the scientists step in and try and hypothesize and test the best way to lead. I'll give you a couple of examples. Researchers at the University of Iowa, Lewin, Lippitt, and White, hypothesized that there were 3 different leadership styles in general: autocratic, democratic, and laissez-faire. Autocratic leaders like to control situations and accumulate power. They dictate work methods, centralize decision-making, and limit participation. They expect followers to be obedient and silent, kind of like children. Democratic or participative leaders are more people-oriented than autocratic ones. They tend to involve their subordinates, delegate authority, and encourage participation. They tend to see their followers as capable and responsible and allow them discretion while holding them accountable. Laissez-faire leadership, according to the Iowa studies, refers to the absence of leadership. The leader doesn't exercise any power or authority, and the followers have the freedom to guide themselves. Imagine the image of a rudderless ship. Laissez-faire leaders are viewed as lacking competence, passion, or initiative. These studies measured these three types of leadership and hypothesized that democratic leadership is the preferable style and it would outperform the other two styles. That makes a lot of intuitive sense, right? Unfortunately, these studies failed to find any significant relationship between style and performance of subordinates. What they did find, however, is that democratic leadership styles tend to lead to higher levels of satisfaction with your supervisor. A second group of studies, this time coming from the Ohio State University, looked at leader behavior from a slightly different angle. They considered two continuous and orthogonal dimensions of leader behaviors: concern for task and concern for relationships. Concern for task involves the emphasis on the job to be done. This suggests that leaders emphasize job-oriented behaviors, making sure that the work gets done and that subordinates perform acceptably. They want the organization to be efficient and effective. Concern for relationships involves the emphasis on people. This suggests that the leader engages in employee-centered behavior, such as displaying trust, respect, and caring for subordinates. These variables are continuous, meaning that leaders can be at all levels from high to low on the dimensions, and orthogonal, meaning that they are linearly independent of one another. This creates a 2x2, where leaders can be positioned on a grid at varied levels of both concern for task and concern for relationship. They named some of the positions on this grid. At the bottom left, leaders display low levels of concern for both task and people. They call this impoverished management. The implication is that if leaders don't care about the work and they don't care about the people, what the heck are they doing, right? Probably scrolling on social media in their office behind closed doors. At the top left, leaders display low levels of concern for production and high levels of concern for people. And they label it illustratively as a country club style of management. Sounds pretty nice. Donuts and flexible work hours for everyone. On the bottom right, leaders are displaying low levels of concern for people and high levels of concern for the task, called fittingly task management. These leaders are focused and they get right to business. They probably won't remember your birthday or grant you any special permissions or exceptions if something goes wrong in your personal life, but they do a darn good job of getting the work done. In the middle of the grid, at medium levels of both, we find middle of the road management. Seems like a balanced approach, all things in moderation. And finally, at the top right is where we find high levels of both concern for people and concern for task or production. And that's called team management. And it's in this top right corner where the best leadership behaviors are hypothesized. They imagine that great leaders are concerned with the job and the people and display behaviors that demonstrate their commitment to both. They don't have to choose between being one or the other. They can help you achieve your best while also seeing you as a real human being. Sounds pretty reasonable, except just like the University of Iowa, empirical studies haven't found any statistically significant relationship between team management and performance. In fact, research has consistently found inconsistent results applying this framework. That's because there's an inherent limitation of these behavioral theories of leadership. It's that they don't consider the situation, that there's not one size fits all behavior for every situation. That's true in leadership as it is in life. Enter the third category, contingency theories of leadership. This is where most of our modern theories of leadership and all those books on the airport fit. Contingency theory is a theory that claims that there's no best way to do anything, to organize a corporation, to lead a company, to make decisions. Instead, the optimal course of action is contingent or dependent on the internal and external situation. It embraces the importance of what we call moderator variables, which affect the strength and direction of the variables that moderate the relationship between leadership style and performance. In other words, what does it depend on? Enter every serious and aspiring leadership theorist or guru who jumps on the contingency theory bandwagon and claims that their moderator variable is the one thing that all leadership theories should depend on. It would take a lifetime to talk about every single contingency claim. Instead, I'm going to walk you through a single contingency theory that illustrates why these theories are so powerful. The situational leadership model takes one particular contingency to heart, the nature of subordinates, and asks, How does leadership behavior depend on who your subordinates are? This model looks at subordinates in terms of two things. Number one, how willing are they to perform the job, their motivation? And number two, are they actually capable of doing the job, their ability? And this theory argues that leaders need to behave differently when they have willing and able subordinates. They plot this on a grid that kind of looks a lot like the Ohio State studies, with slightly different labels that plots task behavior and relationship behavior on opposing axes. Looks familiar, right? On the bottom left quadrant, they consider where people are both able to do the job and willing to do the job. They already have the skills and the motivation. In these circumstances, leaders require very low task-oriented behaviors because people already know what they're doing, and low levels of relationship behavior because they're already motivated to get the job done. As a result, they engage in what they call a delegating management style. On the top left quadrant, people are able in that they have the skills, but unwilling in that they don't have any motivation. In this case, leaders shouldn't just focus on task-related behaviors. That would be a total waste, given they've already have the skills, but rather focus on the relationship behaviors in order to generate enthusiasm, buy-in, and motivation. They call this participating leadership. In the bottom right quadrant, employees are in the opposite situation. They're willing, but unable. Think about new hires filled with enthusiasm, but have not been trained yet. They don't even know where the bathroom is. They argue that these leaders should display task rather than relationship behaviors in order to skill up their workforce. This style of leadership they label telling. Finally, they argue that in the top right quadrant is where high task and high relationship behaviors are required because subordinates are both unwilling and unable to do the job. They're unmotivated and incapable. What's really interesting here is what happens when you contrast it to the Ohio State model. In the Ohio State model, the best leaders would be high task and high relationship. But in the situational leadership model, this is the least attractive quadrant to find yourself. You have to be high task and high relationship because you're stuck with both unskilled and unmotivated workers. From a situational leadership model perspective, those leaders have to behave high task and high relationship because they really don't have a choice. Their team is pretty crappy. In contrast, the impoverished management quadrant, the worst place to be on the Ohio State grid, is probably the best place you'd want to be as a leader, where your subordinates are so willing and so able, you just have to sit back and relax and get out of their way. This model also highlights the dangers of just doing more as a leader. More task and more relationship, regardless of follower needs. I think back to when I was applying to universities. I was clearly capable of filling out an application, or else I probably wouldn't have been ready to go to university in the first place. I was also clearly motivated, excited and enthusiastic about going away to school. My parents nagging me about getting it done and micromanaging the process would have only made me annoyed and resentful, undermined my motivation and driven me crazy. I try and think about this every time I want to control my daughter's every move. That she already knows how to do it, and she already wants to do it, and it's in my best interest just to get out of her way. Although the situational leadership model is just one of many contingency theories of leadership, it provides a framework for you to think about and evaluate any theory that you come across. So next time that you're standing in front of a bookshelf full of leadership books, or when somebody tells you that they have just found the next and best thing about leadership that you just have to hear about, ask yourself, what contingency would this fit? What are the circumstances under which this would work for you? This way you can figure out where or how it can fit into your leadership toolbox.